Good morning, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less to live more, earn your freedom with frugality. As you can tell, I am in my car right now. I just finished up at the gym. Good old Planet Fitness back there. Man, that would be a perfect spot for a sponsor, right? Anyways, we're going to continue discussing pre-Socratic philosophers. This will probably be the last one we do, as far as pre-Socratics, because Socrates himself is finally coming up. We're going to talk about Pythagoras today. Now, yesterday we finished up talking about Anaximenes, who was the third and final major teacher from the Milesian school. Now, Pythagoras does belong to the pre-Socratic philosophers in ancient Greece, but he is not from the same school. He finds his own school, Pythagoreanism. Pretty reasonable, right? Anyways, he was separate from the Milesians like Thales and Anaximander and Anaximenes. And he was reportedly born on the island of Samos as the son of a gem engraver named Monarchus. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. Around 530 BCE, he travels to Croton and founded an ascetic philosophy school. And I'm not sure, I may have gone over asceticism before, but an ascetic is basically somebody who renounces worldly pleasures, kind of like hashtag comfort restrains you type of philosophy. Like kind of like a monk or somebody that would live in the mountains, away from society. And this philosophy school is what we call Pythagoreanism today. Although you've undoubtedly heard about the Pythagorean theorem, which is like a squared plus b squared equals c squared, telling you the angle of a right triangle and like the length of its different sides in proportion to each other. Pythagoras was most well known during his time for his theory of metempsychosis, or the transmigration of souls. And now get this is very similar to like the karmic cycle that we've seen in some of the Eastern philosophy videos I've gone over. So in metempsychosis, Pythagoras believed that souls are immortal and they enter new bodies when people die. Literally reincarnation, basically. Hashtag cyclic, right? So the doctrine of musica universalis has also been tied to Pythagoras. So the Pythagoreans were really like a mystic school. And I won't pontificate too much about it, but in my opinion, most mystic schools throughout history have been like people who discovered naturally occurring psychedelics and then started to really study them, kind of like scientists did with natural phenomenon, but in this case more like internal phenomenon. Anyways, Pythagoras ends up developing this theory that explains planetary motion according to mathematical equations. Quite impressive in my opinion. And he also believed that the planets resonated, producing inaudible music. So his accomplishments back in the day were already abundant in antiquity. They include things like the Pythagorean theorem, again, about right triangles, the Pythagorean tuning, 5 regular solids, like, cubes, pyramids, cylinders, spheres, those things. His theory of proportions. He was also one of the first philosophers to really come up with a whole theory of Earth being a sphere. The fact that Earth wasn't flat. Because remember, like Anaximenes believed that Earth was totally flat and sat like a leaf on top of like a cloud of air, basically. He also comes up with 5 climactic zones, which also pretty insightful. He got to travel quite a bit. I know that supposedly he spoke with the Egyptians, and that's where he got some of his math ideas from. Unfortunately, no authentic writings of his survived, and the earliest references to him we have are satirical poems by Xenophanes, where Pythagoras recognized the voice of a dead friend in a dog's bark. That's kind of funny. Again, remember, metempsychosis, reincarnation. So the joke is that Pythagoras recognized his dead friend's voice in a dog's bark because that dead friend was reincarnated as the dog. And then here's a quote from a historian. It's kind of funny. There is not a single detail in the life of Pythagoras that stands uncontradicted. So we know he was real. We have a ton of stuff attributed to him. We don't know 100% what all of it is true or not, though, unfortunately. So Ancient historian Diogenes Laertius said that Pythagoras, quoting, did not indulge in the pleasures of love, and that he cautioned others to only have sex, quote, whenever you are willing to be weaker than yourself. Yeah, sins of the flesh hold you back, right? Pythagoras left Samos in 530 BCE, around the age of 40, and resettled in the Greek colony of Croton, where he quickly gained influence and public acclaim. Ancient sources extol him for persuading the city's elite to abandon wasteful wealth-seeking behaviors and adopt his purer system. So he was similar to some of the other philosophers we've discussed, a virtue or moral philosopher, where he believed and kind of talked about what it meant to be the best type of human possible. And he was against the whole materialist, consumerist culture of his time, in many ways, kind of like I am with our own culture today. His system's dedication to asceticism was credited as a decisive factor in the colony's victory over their neighbor Sybaris in 510 BCE. So it does seem that Pythagoras had some sort of influence on his city and the kind of lifestyles that people lived, to the point that they attributed their victory over a more powerful neighbor 20 years after his arrival to him. So after their victory, the citizens proposed a democratic constitution, which the Pythagoreans rejected. This was an interesting one to me. So most of our philosophers, including Aristotle, a lot of these guys, at the very least, are lukewarm to democracy, even if they're not fully, democratic. He ends up getting killed because of this argument. Hashtag he's dead now. But Pythagoras was not a Democrat. I mean, I'm talking like little d Democrat, not big D in our current political party system. I'm talking like he believed in aristocracy. Pythagoras thought the regular people shouldn't have any influence in government because they were dumb, basically, in his view at the very least. Now, I don't think people shouldn't be allowed to participate in government just because most of them are dumb. You know, we gotta try to make people smarter. I'm just joking. Anyways, again, he's got tons of mathematical discoveries too. The so-called Pythagoreans, and this is a quote from Aristotle, the so-called Pythagoreans, who were the first to take up mathematics, not only advanced this subject, but saturated with it. They fancied that the principles of mathematics were the principles of all things. Aristotle, Metaphysics, Book 1, Chapter 5. According to Aristotle, the Pythagoreans used math strictly for mystical purposes. Hashtag teach me. And again, in my mind, anytime people talk about mystical things, they're really talking about our psychedelic experiences. The Pythagorean numerology system had that each number represented something important. The number 1 represented the origin of all things. 2 represented matter. 3 was the ideal number because it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. 4 represented the 4 seasons and the 4 elements. Odd numbers were masculine, even numbers were feminine. 10 was the perfect number. And then we finally get to talk about the actual school of Pythagoreanism, which is, in my opinion, the coolest part about what they did. So, Plato and Isocrates both claim the Pythagoreans' greatest contribution to the world was a creation of a new way of life. Even though Pythagoras' organization was called a school, it really resembled something more like a monastery. So these people lived apart from regular society, and they didn't follow regular rules, right? Cult members lived together, they shared all of their possessions, and ate communally in something called a koina typhilon. That's a phrase that says all things in common among friends. Almost sounds kind of like how the Native Americans lived in some ways. Definitely sounds like the kind of psychedelic communities we kind of saw a revival of in the 60s here in the United States even. The Pythagoreans believed that music was purification for the soul, just as medicine was a purification for the body. Psychedelics. School of thought, mathematicoi. Oh yeah, they have 2 schools of thought in the Pythagoreans. They have the mathematicoi and the acousmaticoi. So the first one, the mathematicoi, these are the learners, and they focus on the intellectual, rational, and scientific side of things, whereas the acousmaticoi are the listeners, who focused on mysticism, numerology, and religious teachings. these weren't two necessarily different people. These were just two different trains of thoughts within the school of Pythagoreanism. Some of the other stuff that they emphasized is clearly healthy, but also psychedelic. Physical exercise, therapeutic dancing, daily walk, athletics, morning and nightly contemplation. The stories and legends attributed to Pythagoras and his school would take years to go through, but the story about how he discovered music's mathematical nature is definitely worth telling. So one day he strolled by a blacksmith shop where he heard the clanging of the hammer against the anvil, and he thought that it sounds beautiful. So he walks inside the shop, right? And he thought that he asked the blacksmith if he could test them out because of how harmonious they sounded. And while he was testing them, he had this sudden realization that the sound emitted by the anvil correlated directly to the size of the hammer used to strike it. And as a result of that, he instantly concluded that music was mathematical. Pretty brilliant, right? Hashtag insightful. Now, tons of his communities, Pythagorean schools, end up existing throughout Greece, and they go on to have a huge influence. And it's one of the reasons why we still talk about him today. So, tomorrow we're going to talk about the Peloponnesian War, and we'll finally get to, after that we'll talk about Socrates, and we're doing that on purpose because Socrates is alive during that time period. So, trying to get contemporaneous with him. And then later this week, I think we'll go over to the role of serotonin in the brain and what we can do, like daily habits and stuff, in order to improve our serotonin production, help alleviate any feelings of depression, anxiety, or isolation that you might be experiencing. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for you guys today. Pythagoras was a really cool dude who sounds to me like he had a school of learning in psychedelics, basically. That's what it reminds me of. Anyways, it's a wandering author here, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. What are you guys doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your communities today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part. And you can count on me to do mine daily. Until next time, I love y'all.